Hi, I'm Jason with Level Up Investing, and in this video I'm going to talk about the key contingencies that are involved in the home buying process. So if you haven't seen it already, I created a video called Buying a House 101, which is the overview of the home buying process, and you can take a look at the link up there. And this video is specifically on the contingencies that are involved. So these are important to know, and these are critical that you address these during the process. So let's get right into that. Okay, so for contingencies in real estate transactions, you first need to know what they actually are. What are contingencies? And by definition, contingencies are conditions or terms or actions that must be completed in order to have a legally binding real estate contract. So conditions, terms, or actions that must be achieved, must be met or completed in order to have a legally binding real estate contract in this real estate sale. So what it also really means, ultimately, it means that depending on the contingency, the buyer or seller has the right to back out. Right to back out of the deal if certain contingencies are not met, if they're not met in the time frame that's designated in the contract. And it's very important that you review this with your agent. Review each contingency in detail, and so you know really what you're getting into and what are your options for backing out if things don't go right. So it is very important to speak with your agent. This talk is going to be really just the basics, some key things to know, just showing up, knowing the key terms, but the actual details, the fine print, you really want to make sure you go over it with your agent on your specific deal. So the first most common contingency is the inspection contingency. What that does, it gives you as the buyer a chance to have the time to inspect the property, have a licensed inspector come by, and it also gives you a chance to really know what you are getting into and what you're purchasing. You can get a report, or you should get a report from that inspector, and that report also gives you an opportunity to review with a seller, and you can negotiate further to talk about things that need to be improved, or credits that you need to get in order to improve them yourself after you've purchased the property. So let's go right into looking at some of the actual verbiage from a inspection contingency on one of our deals. Okay, so here's an example of some of the words in the actual contract. So this is from an actual contract that we used for one of our properties. And again, you want to make sure that you look at your own individual contract that you and your agent have reviewed and completed and submitted. This is just for example purposes. So take a look at this section number 12, property inspection, right to cancel. That's important though, that you have that right to cancel based on this inspection. So it says here, the buyer shall have 15, and if you left it blank, the default would have been 15 days. 15 days after the effective date within which to have such inspections of the property performed as the buyer shall desire during the inspection period. And this is key here. If the buyer determines in the buyer's sole discretion that the property is not acceptable, the buyer may terminate this contract by delivering written notice of such election to seller prior to expiration of the inspection period. So what that's telling me is that as the buyer, I have 15 days from the time we went into contract, 15 days to hire an inspector, get them to the property, get the property inspection done, and hopefully it happens in one day, and give me time to get the report, which sometimes it takes a couple days, maybe, get the inspection report, and gives me a chance to decide as the buyer if I'm going to back out at my sole discretion. I can back out based on what was found on the inspection, or also gives me a chance to talk to the seller and renegotiate and update the contract if something needs to be fixed. For example, if I see that the roof is totally shot and I want the contract to say that I'm going to get a credit for a new roof, that kind of thing. So what this does is it gives me the right to cancel this deal as long as I achieve this within the time period. So the date, the number of days you put there is very, very important. As you can see, there's a lot of steps that are involved. Sometimes it might take you a few days to get the inspector out there, especially if you have one you really like. In our properties, we pretty much use the same inspector for all our properties, both residential and commercial, because we really like their work. We got a good reference on them in the very beginning, and we've been very, very happy with their work. And they usually get someone out to inspect the property within a day or two. So you want to know, especially if you're going to work with a new inspector, one you've never worked with before. Let's see. And the rest of this is here. Unless the buyer exercises the right to terminate granted herein, buyer accepts the physical condition of the property and any violation of governmental and all this other stuff, as is maintenance requirement. Buyer shall be responsible for any and all repairs and improvements required by buyer's lender. So that's why this whole thing is in bold, because that whole paragraph is very important. The key is that you have to exercise this inspection, and otherwise, if you don't exercise this inspection, you're accepting the property as is in this physical condition. So that's very important as the inspection contingency. Okay, the next common contingency is the financing contingency or loan contingency or mortgage contingency. What this does is it again gives the buyer time to secure financing for the property. And this also has a very significant time frame that you have to follow that shows that you have in due diligence obtained or tried to obtain financing. So this takes time, and this is important contingency because if what you're saying is that if you cannot secure the financing, assuming you're getting a mortgage for the property, if you cannot secure that financing, then if you do this within the time frame allotted, then you have the right to back out of the deal. And you want to make sure you know the details of this contingency, especially if you're dealing with multiple different banks or mortgage brokers, and it's going to be time consuming. You want to know exactly what that time frame is that you have to achieve this condition of the mortgage. So let's go into looking at that actual mortgage contingency that's seen in one of our contracts. All right, so this is the financing contingency in one of our actual contracts. Just like the previous contingency, you want to make sure you know the exact details of your contract that you review with your agent, and use this as just an example. So financing. So if I were buying this with cash, then I'd be checking off this box. But instead, in this example, I'm actually using financing, so this box was checked off. This contract is contingent upon buyer obtaining approval of a conventional loan within 30 days after effective date. So when you look at the time frame here, you see buyer shall make mortgage loan application for the financing within 5 days and use good faith and diligent effort to obtain approval of a loan, meeting the financing terms and thereafter to close this contract. So this contract, for example, gives even more detail on, for the purpose of this provision, diligent effort. Includes but is not limited to timely furnishing all documents and information and paying for of all fees and charges requested by buyer's mortgage broker and lender in connection with the buyer's mortgage loan application. So the contingency is telling everyone involved that I am going to diligently put diligent effort into obtaining financing, and that this contract is contingent upon me obtaining approval of this financing within 30 days. So this is important because now it gives me a time frame of if I don't secure this approval, then I'm able to back out of the deal. So some deals where we've bought some properties even as rentals, or even the houses that we've bought ourselves, someone else bought it for ourselves. Someone else will have tried to buy it before us, and then we'll hear something like, well, the financing fell through. That's what the other agent will say, and this is what they're talking about, that the contingency was not met, and so the deal could not go through. So this is an example of the financing or loan or mortgage contingency, which you have to make sure you review the details fully with your agent, as you know, so that you know what you're getting into. And the third common contingency is the appraisal contingency. So what the appraisal contingency is it allows you as the buyer to get a professional opinion, basically, based on numerous factors, on the value of the property. And what that does is it helps both you and the lender, protects both you and the lender by determining what is the market value of the property based on numerous factors: the location, the number of bedrooms, number of bathrooms, and several other points that are involved in this very comprehensive report that has to be done strictly under certain guidelines. So that tells you and the lender, okay, this is the actual value of the property. It also tells the lender, it gives them an idea of how much, yes, no, meaning how much are they actually going to lend on the property. Sometimes it might help them determine if they're actually going to go through with the lending process. If it turns out that the appraisal value is a lot lower than your contract amount, the lender might review that. Their underwriter might review that, or will review it actually, and might have a different determination. Or they might say, hey, look, you are in contract for a property and the contract is $300,000, but the appraisal came out to $250,000 is the value. So guess what? The bank is going to say, you know what, we're only going to lend you on a sale price of $250,000. Meaning if you put in, say, 20% down as an example, we're only going to lend you 80% of $250,000. We're not going to lend you 80% of $300,000 because this is what the appraisal came up with. So we had a situation like that in one of our properties where we had to make a decision. Hey, are we going to go ahead with the deal and kick in the other $50,000? Just an example, kicking the other $50,000 in cash on our own and still get the 80% of the appraised value, or do we walk away in the deal? You know, there was one deal that we actually went through and we wanted the property and we paid the extra cash. There was another property where we walked away. So if you're buying this as part of your first house, your first property, you really want to seriously consider what the appraisal number comes out to and talk to your bank. You want to talk to your agent as well on these details, because the appraisal and a lot of times can make or break a deal. So let's go over the appraisal documentation that you would see in a typical contract. And this is an appraisal contingency example from one of our deals. In your deal, it might look different, and so keep that in mind. Review your own deal in detail. So in this example, sorry, it's a little cattywampus here, but you get the idea. This contract is contingent upon the buyer obtaining, at my expense, a written appraisal from a licensed Florida appraiser on or before, and this one said at least 10 days prior to closing, stating, and it's usually going to happen way before that, stating that the appraised value of the property is at least $500,000. This is just an example. And if the appraisal states that the appraised value of the property is less than the above value, the buyer shall deliver a copy of this within 3 days to the seller. And this is the key here: either terminating the contract or waiving and removing this contingency and continuing with the contract. So what is it? It gives me as the buyer an opportunity to back out of the deal if the appraisal value is less than whatever was determined here, which is generally the sale price. So it gives me a time frame, and it also tells me that what's the time frame of me getting the report over to the seller, and when I'm able to go ahead and terminate this contract. So yeah, so this usually happens a lot sooner than 10 days prior to closing, usually because the bank wants to see this really early. And a lot of times the bank will just go ahead and order it. They'll tell you, well, they won't go ahead. They'll tell you they'll order it as part of your lending process. They're going to order it, and of course, you as a buyer, you're going to pay for that appraisal report. It's going to show up at the end. So this is the appraisal contingency. This is an example of it, and this is also important for you to review with your agent as you're making that offer. So those are the three most common contingencies you'll see, especially if you're buying a house for the first time. So let me just go over a couple interesting other contingencies that exist. There are many other possible contingencies, and basically anything can be written down in the contract. But a couple other interesting ones. So there's this thing called the home sale contingency, and let me draw that here. So let's say this is you as the buyer, and this is the seller. And you are talking about buying this house. A little chimney. Okay. So you've got a contract between you and the seller. And then one contingency that is not as common, I guess, as the other three, but it's something called the home sale contingency. Home sale contingency. So what that contingency is that is telling the seller that you as the buyer, you're telling the buyer that you need to sell your current house first so that you can have the finances to purchase this house. Okay, so that's the home sale contingency. What it does is it's a contingency that gives you as the buyer time to sell the property, get it all settled out, and get the finances. And it's agreed upon amount of time as well, usually. So the details of that contract, again, are very specific to that deal. So this is very much a generalization. So this is a home sale contingency, and the seller would have to agree to that. And a lot of times that could be tough for the seller, because in those situations, a lot of times the deal is tied up with you for sometimes an extended period of time in order for you to get that contingency. So on the other hand, the seller is concerned that maybe another buyer number 2, comes around, and that buyer wants to purchase this house, but normally they can't because you're in contract. Well, the seller, as part of the initial contract, they can also do something called a kick out. kick-out clause. And in the kick-out clause, what that's saying is that the seller can continue to market the property even though they're in contract with you. And if they find a buyer who's interested, then what the seller's kick-out clause does is the seller will tell you, hey, you have a certain amount of time, for example, 72 hours. You have 72 hours to eliminate this home sale contingency, and then we'll just go through with the deal. Now, if you don't do this, if you don't agree, or if you don't get this, if you don't get it done in the 72 hours, then my kick-out clause will kick into effect as the seller, and then I can go ahead and sell it to this person, and then you're out of the deal. So that is the kick-out clause. These are a couple interesting different contingencies. There are several other types of contingencies. There could be a contingency for really anything you want, as long as the other party agrees to it, I guess. But these are just a couple different interesting contingencies that might show up, that might apply to the situation. So again, you want to review that with your agent. Okay, so those are the key contingencies in the home buying process. It's important to remember that you want to work with your real estate agent to make sure that you understand these contingencies that are specific to your deal, to your property. You want to make sure you understand all of them and how they're going to be executed and how they are appearing in the contract that you are signing. And so definitely talk to your professional when it comes to your individual deal. So if you like this content, definitely give us a like, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell, as this is a video in the series, the Buying a House series. So I look forward to you joining on the next video.